All right, let's take a look at the two additional practice questions that I posted in Google Classroom this week, the ones that say more practice and even more practice. We went over these on Tuesday, but here is me working through them on the board so you can see a little bit better. The first question said, assume a country's economy is in a short-run equilibrium and the actual unemployment rate is lower than the natural rate of unemployment. So right away we should assume that there's a little bit of inflation going on here with an actual unemployment rate that's lower than the natural rate of unemployment. So first thing, we need to draw a correctly labeled graph of long run and short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and then label everything. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we've got price level, real GDP, that are long run aggregate supply, short run aggregate supply. And then because we have a little bit of inflation going on, we're going to see aggregate demand to the right where that long run equilibrium would be. So here's our new short run equilibrium, right? And you can kind of see that the price level is going to be higher, right? So it wants us to label the current price level, which is right here, our short run equilibrium, as PL1, and then the current output level at Y1. So you can see that we're producing a little bit more than we would at the full employment level. And the full employment output level, which would be right here, labeled as YF, all right? And so that takes care of part A. Part B then said, what open market operation can the country's central bank use to move the economy toward its long-run equilibrium? We went over this. It's the idea here of selling bonds, okay? So they're gonna wanna sell bonds. Remember that by selling bonds, you're going to get a decrease in the money supply, which gives you an increase in interest rates, which should then give you a decrease in aggregate demand, because you're going to see less investment spending, less consumption spending because of the higher rate of interest. Okay. Part C, use a correctly labeled money market graph to show how the country's central bank action to move the economy towards long-run equilibrium affects the nominal rate of interest in the short run. So let's take a look at that. We've got nominal rate of interest. We've got quantity of money, money supply, money demand, right? So money supply, money demand. Here's our nominal rate of interest. And so now we know by selling bonds, that's going to decrease the money supply. So leftward shift in the money supply. And we can see that the nominal rate of interest increases. All right, so that's how we would show that there. And then remember, the idea here is that this increase in the nominal rate of interest is what's going to cause the decrease in aggregate demand, because with a higher rate of interest, less consumption spending, less investment spending as a result. Okay. Part D then says, based on the interest rate change from Part C, will each of the following increase, decrease, or remain the same in the short run? We just talked about why real output would decrease because you have a decrease in aggregate demand. If you think about that, come back over here, decrease aggregate demand, okay? And you'll notice that if you decrease aggregate demand, even if you get it back to its full employment level, right? If you were to decrease aggregate demand, you would notice that real output would decline as a result, okay? So real output's gonna decrease because less aggregate demand. Less aggregate demand or less real output. We know that the natural rate of unemployment stays the same. That's a long run average. It stays the same in this situation, okay? And then the last part, assume instead the central bank does not pursue monetary policy action from Part B, no other government intervention. So remember we said this is key because with no other government intervention, there's nothing that can impact aggregate demand. Policy actions by the central bank or by the federal government are going to impact aggregate demand. So now we're saying that none of that's going to happen. So what's going to happen here with each of the following? Are they going to increase, decrease, or remain the same? Short-run aggregate supply in this situation is going to decrease, right? It's going to shift back to the left, all right? Back to this long-run average. Why? Why does short-run aggregate supply decrease? Well, because at this point here, there's still what we call the profit effect. There's still profit motive. There's still extra income to be made for producers. So they're willing and able to produce at that particular level. But as price continues to rise, that profit effect goes away. Costs are going to catch up with producers. All right, they're going to have to pay their workers higher wages. They may have to open another factory, things like that. So eventually it gets to the point where there's no more profit effect. So it doesn't make sense to produce at this level anymore. And so as a result, you get a cut back in production, all right, and then that's going to shift the short-run aggregate supply curve back to its the long-run average here. All right, back to that full employment position. All right, and the last part says what happens with employment. Employment goes down, it decreases. We can see that happening here, right? It's going to move back to the full employment level. All right, so employment is actually going to decrease. Okay, all right, that's question 1 from Tuesday.